Bungie buffed this build for Season 23 and made it so powerful that it literally breaks the game. Just look at the damage numbers on the new dungeon boss. They read 999999, and that's because the game cannot register over 1,000,000 damage instantaneously. But you'll notice that when I jump off the map immediately after doing this, I do almost 1.2 million damage, and that's not even the maximum potential that this build has. And we'll get to that in just a little bit, but first let's break down exactly what we're using and why we're using it. This is a Celestial Nighthawk build, but not just any, because keep in mind that Bungie has just recently buffed this exotic for Season 23. Previously, when you put on Celestial Nighthawk, it wasn't really an exotic that you would use for a build. It was basically the type of exotic you would swap to do damage to a boss and then quickly swap off. But now with its new rework, it's actually definitely good to keep this thing on, and the reason why is because Bungie's buff to this exotic reads precision kills now grant super energy ranging between plus 1.5% and plus 4.5%, depending on the type of target killed. So simply put, if you get precision kills while having Celestial Nighthawk on, you're gonna get your super back significantly faster, and this is going to double stack with the helmet mod hands-on, which will allow us to get super energy from getting melee kills, which we can then utilize by getting precision melee kills, doubling the amount of super energy we get for this. And if that wasn't enticing enough to basically get your super back really fast, you also will have infinite melees due to the gameplay loop of Knock 'em Down, the aspect, paired with the fragment of Ember of Torches. The way this works is you throw your knife, you get a headshot kill, and it's instantly refunded back to you. And keep in mind, as long as you get a precision melee kill, you'll get the benefits of hands-on and the buff to Celestial Nighthawk, meaning you're getting your super back extremely fast, and it's extremely powerful, as you can see in that clip there, where we can do an almost instantaneous 1.2 million damage. And that's also largely due to the buff that Bungie gave this that reads increase Golden Gun impact damage by 25%. So Celestial Nighthawk is an exotic you can use for a build now, a rapid super regeneration build, and on top of that, it's one of the best burst DPS exotic options that you can use right now. So let's give a complete breakdown of the subclass here. Of course, you need to use the Marksman Golden Gun. This is the one that gives you more damage by getting a precision hit, which of course is essential when using this exotic. There's a good amount of risk to reward here, because if you do miss your Celestial Nighthawk shot, or if it's a non-precision hit, well, you just blew an absolute ton of damage. So keep in mind, make sure to hit your shots out there with the Golden Gun. I myself, I would never miss. In 9 years, I've never missed a Celestial Nighthawk shot ever, and you won't find any clips anywhere on the internet to say otherwise. Now moving on to the abilities, the first one is going to be Gambler's Dodge. This is the one where you dodge near enemies and it gives you your melee ability back instantly. This is of course essential because occasionally you're going to throw your knife and it's not going to kill the target, and you're going to be like, uh-oh, now what do I do? Well, all you have to do is just dodge near that very same enemy, you'll get your melee back, and then you want to throw your knives again, and make sure to get that precision kill, of course. For the jump, you can use anything you want, but I think pretty much everyone uses triple jump in PvE, right? For the melee, you can actually use a variety of different knives. I just recommend Knife Trick for this build. The reason why is because it's the most effective in PvE in my opinion. You're using this melee mostly for ad clear, and it does apply Scorch to targets, which will loop into this build perfectly, and we'll get to that in just a moment. The next part is your grenade, and you're absolutely going to need Healing Grenade because we're going to take advantage of that Empyrean Soulless gameplay loop, where you basically have a sort of diluted god mode. Myself personally, I call Restoration ×2 with Empyrean god mode, and that's the Warlock build that I previously brought to you. But Restoration ×1 with Empyrean is kind of like a, I don't know how you'd call it, a demigod mode, right? You can see in the gameplay here behind me, when I'm running around with Restoration ×1, I can run around and take a ton of damage. I'm just constantly healing. It's pretty good, and the only way we're actually activating our restoration on this build is by our healing nade. So it's very important to immediately when the encounter starts, throw a healing nade at your feet, get that restoration going, and start clearing the ads to get your timer up to 12 seconds. And keep in mind that you need to kill another ad within that 12-second timer, or you're gonna have to reproc it. But don't worry if all the ads go away, or if you're in the middle of a DPS cycle and your timer runs out completely. This build is designed so that even when your restoration runs out, you're going to be able to get your grenade back extremely fast. And I'll explain why that is when we get there. I'm just trying to go in chronological order now. The aspect first is going to be Knock 'em Down. The first part doesn't really matter for our super because we don't really need the increased duration. We're just trying to pop our super and instantly fire it. But the second part is extremely important, which is that while you're radiant, getting a throwing knife kill will immediately refund it, which is why we're able to do that infinite throwing knife loop with torches like I just previously mentioned. And then the next aspect we're going to use is On Your Mark. This one doesn't really tie into the build that much. It's just nice to have really fast reload, and the other aspects aren't as good, so we just go with this one by default. Now breaking down the fragments that we use for this build to get that juicy gameplay loop. First up we have Empyrean. Now we're going to be using this by throwing our healing nade on our feet like I mentioned, and then getting solar ability or solar weapon final kills. You can do this in a variety of different ways. Choose whatever solar weapon you want. I personally think Sunshot is the absolute best this season, and if you're not getting Sunshot kills, you can actually get throwing knife kills as well, which will tie in really well to getting your super back extremely fast, so keep that in mind. And with Empyrean, I personally like to pair the Fragment Solus with it. It's not entirely necessary at all, but we do have 5 slots here, and I personally find that doubling that timer is really nice initially, because when you're out there trying to solo the dungeon with this build perhaps, you'll find that your restoration and radiant timers are so extremely short that by putting on Solus, you'll be able to more easily extend those timers. But this fragment's not necessarily all, I just personally like it. I think it makes the ease of use a little bit better for this build. The next one is Ember of Torches, which is a must-have fragment for this build. Like we mentioned before already, your throwing knife kills will instantly kill an enemy and make you radiant, which immediately refunds them due to knock them down. So the synergy between torches and knock them down is literally picture perfect, and that's why you want to use those two together. Even if you're not using Celestial Nighthawk, if you're using any other Solar Hunter build or any other Solar Exotic armor piece, make sure to use those two, because those two in combination are just so powerful. The next one we're using is Ember of Singeing. Your class ability recharges faster when you scorch targets, and we're scorching targets through a variety of different ways. The first, of course, being throwing our knives infinitely like we talked about, but also due to the artifact mods and using Sunshot, we will be scorching targets by getting kills with it. The artifact perk we're talking about is Kindling Trigger here, which is Radiant causes solar weapons to apply Scorch to unscorched combatants, which means that when you have Radiant, by throwing your melee at any point in time because of torches, if you shoot your Sunshot, it will apply Scorch stacks to those enemies, which will then refund you your class ability back. So this is a perfect gameplay loop here. You throw your melee, get Radiant. If for whatever reason you whiff your melee, you're going to use your dodge to get your melee back and throw your melee again, so you can never really mess that one up. But even if you do, you're still Radiant from just hitting that knife on the enemy at all. So if you just shoot your Sunshot quite a bit, it'll apply Scorch stacks and it will refund your class ability back, so then you have infinite class ability melee loop. And then the final fragment that we're going to be using is going to be Ember of Blistering. Now keep in mind, there's a ton of other fragments you can use. Ordinarily, I don't add this fragment to my Solar Hunter builds, but in Season 23, we're able to create so many ignitions due to those artifact mods that I just cannot help myself but lean into those ignitions a little bit more, and that's why I chose to use Ember of Blistering. You may not have used this very much in the past, but it actually reads defeating targets with solar ignitions grants grenade energy, and of course, due to the artifact mod, Rays of Precision, while Radiant Solar Precision Final Blows cause combats to ignite, while Radiant Solar Precision Final Blows cause combatants to ignite. That means we're causing ignitions a ton because we're always Radiant, we're always extending the timer of Radiance due to ability and weapon final blows, and everything around you is igniting, which now will also refund you grenade energy, meaning you're going to have more healing grenades. So just in case you run out of restoration, don't worry, you've been shooting your Sunshot, you're going to have your grenade back almost immediately. That's what makes this gameplay loop so powerful and so strong. But alternatively, there are a few other fragments that you could throw in there, and I'll give some notable mentions here. Ember of Eruption actually extends the AoE of your ignitions, which can create for even bigger explosions, clearing bigger mobs of adds. And also Ember of Wonder will cause your solar ignitions to give you orbs of power, which can be really nice. Feel free to use either of those if you don't like blistering. Now let's do a breakdown of the weapons, the artifact, the armor, the mods, and the stats. First up for the weapons, we are using Riptide, which has Chill Clip on it. This has been a staple in a lot of different Guardians arsenal ever since it came in the game, because with 2 bursts originally you could freeze an enemy. Now unfortunately it takes 3 bursts to freeze an enemy, but don't worry, we're not using it to freeze enemies. We're actually using it because the effect of slowing an enemy will increase our weapon damage, and that's due to the artifact mod right here, which is called Torch. While Radiant, deal increased weapon damage to combatants affected by Strand and Stasis debuffs. Now obviously we're going to be infinitely Radiant due to Ember of Torches throwing infinite melees, and due to Empyrean extending that timer, so it's going to be very easy to get this damage buff as long as we shoot our fusion rifle first. We'll get a 5% damage increase to targets, which is very powerful, which although 5% may not seem that much, it is very powerful. Moving on to our energy weapon, we're going to be using the Sunshot. This thing causes infinite explosions, applies Scorch to everything, clears the adds efficiently, clears majors. The only thing the Sunshot can't do is crazy DPS to bosses, but other than that, literally you can just use Sunshot in every activity everywhere you go, and it is always a good option. Lastly, for the first boss, I was just using a Cataphract GL3. This is the Trials grenade launcher that has Envious Assassin and Bait and Switch. This allows you to get an absolutely massive magazine, and due to the fact that we are initially shooting adds with our Sunshot and then immediately swapping over and hitting the boss with a Riptide to apply the slow effect to it, we're immediately getting Bait and Switch when we swap to this weapon without having to waste any time at all, which makes the burst DPS potential on the first dungeon boss just incredible. I mean, look at how much damage I did to the first dungeon boss here in one damage cycle. And alternatively, if you're in different encounters attackers, or if you're trying to use this against other things, you can use a solar machine gun to extend the timer of your restoration and radiant. The Trials machine gun Unwavering Duty is one of the better options, or you can go with Old Faithful and use Apex Predator for your DPS power weapon. Those choices are entirely yours. Just base it on whatever boss you're fighting. Some bosses, it's about burst DPS, and other bosses, it's about sustained DPS, so pick the weapon that you feel suits you. Your power weapon doesn't really tie into this build, so let's move on to the armor. Here's a breakdown of the armor, starting with the helmet. Of course, we're using the exotic Celestial Nighthawk. Its perk reads Precision Final Blows, reduce the cooldown of your super, which we talked about previously. We're going to be utilizing that with Precision Sunshot kills, and mostly with Precision Knife kills as well. The second part reads Modifies Golden Gun to fire a single high damage shot. Targets defeated by that shot give you super energy and explode. Now, we're more than likely not going to defeat targets with the Celestial Nighthawk. We're just using this to hit bosses for an extreme amount of damage. And I don't think I need to remind you, but just remember that all of your Golden Gun damage is being put into one shot, so don't miss. The helmet mods you're going to want to use for this build are going to be as follows. Heavy Ammo Finder is going to be essential, and this is going to tie in extremely well to using the Sunshot a lot, because you're going to get a ton of Sunshot kills, and it's going to create a ton of heavy ammo for you, so make sure you have this on your helmet. The next mod is going to be Harmonic Siphon, which of course ties into using the Sunshot as well. Rapidly getting Sunshot kills will create Orbs of Power for you, and you're going to pick up those Orbs of Power, and they're going to cause your Celestial Nighthawk to actually do more damage, and I'll explain why in just a moment. The third mod is Hands-On, which is gain bonus super energy from melee kills. We previously talked about this, so I don't need to explain too much more. Just throw your melee, get precision kills, and watch how fast your super comes back. Now let's move on to the gauntlet mods that we have for this build. First up is Solar Loader, which for myself, I just can't stand the slow reload of Sunshot and Zali's Bane, but personally, I would recommend everyone to just use heavy-handed, so that way those melee kills you get will create Orbs of Power. And keep in mind that due to our fragment, on your mark, Precision Final Blows do grant increased handling and reload speed, which means that you really don't need Solar Loader. With this build particularly, you can get away with heavy-handed more so than any other, but I'm just a bit stubborn. I can't stand reloading slowly, and because our dodge doesn't reload our weapon, we're using the dodge that refunds our melee. I need to reload my Sunshot faster, so that's why I chose to go with this. The other two mods, though, are absolutely essential. There's only two choices to pick here. You've got Impact Induction, which is going to be causing damage with your powered melee, gives you grenade energy, and then you have Focusing Strike, which is going to be causing damage with your melee, gives you class ability energy. Obviously, we're throwing our melee infinitely, so we're going to get our class ability back faster, and we're going to get our grenades back faster, which means more healing nades and more class abilities, and we're going to use those class abilities to get our grenades back due to our class item mod, and we're also going to use those class abilities to get our melees back in case our melee doesn't kill an enemy. And on top of that, we will use our melees sometimes to not kill enemies, but instead to debuff the bosses due to the seasonal artifact mod, but we'll get to that in just a moment. On the chest piece, I always recommend to use melee damage resistance if you're using a melee oriented build like this one. We are just in such close proximity to enemies that you'll find this to be the most powerful resistance mod. Then use whatever mods you need to survive against enemies. It can be Solar Void, Solar Arc, doesn't matter, just whatever's shooting you, pick the right resistance mod for that activity, so that way you have added survivability. Lastly, on our boot mods, this is absolutely essential that you do this. Do not mess this up, or this build will suck for you. On your boots, you're going to need Recuperation, which is picking up an Orb of Power, is going to replenish your health. This is going to be your saving grace if you ever run out of restoration, because orbs are going to be all over the place for you due to the way we've structured our build, because we're getting a ton of Sunshot kills, and those Sunshot kills are making orbs for you. So make sure to have this on. This is just excellent survivability. I pretty much use this on every build that I ever take into endgame content, as you already probably know because you're subscribed to this channel. Then the next two mods are Kinetic Weapon Surge and Double Kinetic Weapon Surge. And you might be thinking, Lucky, are you on crack cocaine? And no, I'm not. That was last week. We need to use Double Kinetic Weapon Surge because this actually buffs your Celestial Nighthawk damage. For whatever bizarro reason, Kinetic Weapon Surge buffs the Golden Gun damage from your Celestial Nighthawk, which is why we run two of them. Initially, it used to work with 3 Kinetic Weapon Surges, but Bungie decided to fix it, but their fix actually only worked if you equip 3 of them. So make sure whatever you do, do not equip 3 Kinetic Weapon Surges, only equip 2. Now let's move on to the class item. The class item mods for this build are essential as well. You're going to want Powerful Attraction. This will just pick up all the orbs nearby, and you're going to be using your dodge quite a bit because you're on a hunter and you can get it back so fast. And on top of that, by using your dodge, the next weapon kill you get will then create an Orb of Power. So then your Sunshot's going to be making crazy orbs, which will also stack with an artifact mod that we'll get to in just a moment, which is going to make you literally spawn like 4 orbs from every 1 kill. And lastly, we have Bomber on here, which means when you use your class ability, you're going to get a little bit more grenade energy back, which is just especially helpful because your healing nade is really your get out of jail free card. You're going to want to have the uptime of that be extremely high because at any point in time when your shields get broken and you feel like you might die, you're going to want to look down and throw a healing nade at your feet, especially when you're trying to solo flawless the new dungeon, utilizing this build perhaps. Now let's talk a little bit about stats for a moment. Of course, 100 resilience. If we're doing anything in challenging endgame PvE, 100 resilience is a must. Then the next highest stat for me is going to be discipline. My stats got a little bit messed up here, but ordinarily I'm going to run 100 resilience and 100 discipline. And then after that, I'm going for absolutely as much mobility as possible. It's not entirely necessary due to the way we've structured our build, but I just like to have some just in case. After that, recovery, intellect, and strength really don't matter at all. I wouldn't worry about that one bit. Just get your 100 resilience, get your 100 discipline, and then fit as much mobility as you can, and you've got a really good build. But one last thing, keep in mind to set up your artifact properly. I've now thoroughly tested and demonstrated so many different perks here, and I found a unique combination of them that make this build even more powerful than most people realize. Firstly, I'll go over the simple stuff, which of course solo operative. If you're out there doing any solo activity, just use this. This just makes you do more damage by being in an activity solo. Raise of precision, of course, we're always going to be using. This is the one that causes a ton of ignitions from our sunshot. Then we also have revitalizing blast, which is going to debuff enemies by 15% if you affect them with your melee. It could also work for your grenade, but we're using healing nade and that doesn't cause any damage. So for this instance, we're using our melee, and that's why occasionally you'll run out of your melees because you're going to throw it at the boss, which won't instantly refund it, but it will debuff that boss, allowing you to do that crazy damage like we saw earlier. And then what you'll need to do is dodge near enemies to get your melee back again. And if you have a long damage cycle, you'll end up throwing your melee at the boss once more, debuffing them again. But that means that you're going to be out of your melee and you're going to be out of your class ability. So then you're in big trouble, right? Wrong. Get sunshot kills, which will scorch targets, get your class ability back almost instantly. Continue the gameplay loop over and over and over again, and enjoy being an ability spam god. Next up is the mod right here, which is Wished into Being. I severely underestimated how strong this mod is. This is way stronger than I realized, and it reads, while your super is nearly fully charged, ability final blows spawn orbs of power. This stacks with everything else, meaning that when you rally the flag and start the encounter with your super fully charged, when you throw your knives out there, enemies will literally drop up to 4 orbs from one kill. I have no clue why this drops so many orbs. I imagine it stacks with heavy-handed, but even still, it doesn't make sense for it to drop 4 orbs from one kill, but it does. I slowed the footage down on several different clips, so take my word for it. This is crazy. Definitely use this mod. Then, of course, we're always going to want this mod right here, so our ability damage does more to take in scoring combatants, which means when our throwing knives are thrown, they're going to kill the enemies, and also make sure to get those headshots. Then we're going to use Torch, which, of course, we talked about, gives us a 5% damage increase by using that Chill Clip Fusion. Then we have Flint Striker, which is rapid solar weapon precision hits, and rapid solar weapon final blows grant radiant. For whatever crazy reason, if you lose your melee, you lose your dodge, just getting sunshot kills will give you your radiant back, which will cause ignitions, increase your weapon damage output, and start the gameplay loop all over again. And then we're also going to want this artifact perk here so we can slot in another mod in the helmet. And lastly, Kindling Trigger, which is radiant, causes solar weapons to apply scorch to unscorched combatants, which we already talked about why that's so extremely powerful, which means that every single artifact perk actually complements this build perfectly, which is why I'm so excited about this build. It's so strong and so much fun. I'm very happy that Bungie reworked it. And the very last thing I wanted to share with you is that if you thought that 1.2 million damage while solo was an extremely high amount of damage, keep in mind that's not even the maximum amount of damage possible due to this artifact mod here, Heart of the Flame. Casting your solar super grants nearby allies radiant and increases the damage of your super for each nearby ally. So literally, if you had 5 teammates next to you while you pop that Celestial Nighthawk, it would do even more damage. So even though this build is absolutely insane and so good for solo content, it's even crazier for team content, and it's one that I will definitely take into the Grandmasters and Master raids. Let me know what you think about the build down in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, click on the screen here to watch another one from the channel. And if you're feeling thirsty out there, make sure to use code LUCKY10p to save some money on G Fuel. Also, make sure you're following me on Twitch and Kick. I go live all the time playing Destiny 2. Lastly, make sure you're following me on X, Instagram, and TikTok, where I deliver Destiny 2 news to you daily. I appreciate all the followers out there.